Hey everyone, welcome back. You ready to dive deep into music history?
Always ready for a good music history deep dive.
Perfect. Well, today we're taking a journey through the evolution of music over the decades. We've got some really interesting listener notes here. The evolution of music over the decades.
Oh, that's going to be fun.
Yeah. We'll uncover how music has changed, like how different genres popped up, how technology played a role.
Yeah, cultural influences, too.
Oh, absolutely. Like what was happening in the world that shaped the music. But, before we jump into the big iconic moments, we got to start with the roots.
Got to have a foundation.
Exactly. So folk music, that's where it all began, right? The heart and soul of it all.
It really is. Think about it. Folk music, it was the soundtrack to everyday life, passed down generation to generation. Like these simple melodies, they're the building blocks, the DNA of so much music we hear today.
So the OG musical storytelling. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, boom, late 1800s, we hit a turning point. The phonograph.
Game changer.
Right. Suddenly, music wasn't just like a live experience.
You could take it home with you?
Exactly. You could listen to it whenever you wanted. It revolutionized everything. This was the start of recorded music and the whole concept of popular music.
It's wild to think about how big of a shift that was. Okay, so let's jump ahead to the 1920s, the roaring 20s.
Oh, yeah.
Jazz explodes.
And man, did it shake things up.
Big time. What's so fascinating about jazz is, it wasn't just about the music.
It challenged, everything. Social norms went right out the window.
It really did. Tell us more about that.
Well, take the whole issue of racial segregation. Jazz brought black and white musicians together. That was unheard of at the time. And don't forget the powerful women in jazz.
Like Bessie Smith.
Exactly. Women like Bessie Smith were front and center, belting out those incredible vocals, challenging gender roles, right alongside everything else.
And I can just imagine the atmosphere, the smoky jazz clubs.
Oh, yeah.
That energy, that sense of breaking free. But how did that rebellion translate into the actual sound of jazz? What made it so different?
It's all about those syncopated rhythms. Think of it like this. You're clapping along to a regular beat, but then, bam, you hit a note off the beat.
Like an unexpected accent.
Exactly. It's that unexpectedness that gives jazz its energy. It's unpredictable, it's exciting, it's all about improvisation, just like the times.
So cool. Okay, so we're moving and grooving through the decades. Next stop, the 1950s. And with it,
rock and roll.
Elvis, Chuck Berry, talk about raw energy.
They weren't just singers, they were cultural earthquakes. They brought this wild mix of blues, country, and even gospel.
That's what makes it so unique.
Totally. Take Elvis's Hound Dog. You can hear it all. You've got those bluesy guitar riffs, right? But then you've got those powerful gospel-infused vocals. And that driving rhythm, that's pure country. It was like a musical melting pot.
A sonic explosion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the sound. It was the attitude, the dancing.
The whole shebang.
Yeah. And the parents, well, let's just say not everyone was thrilled.
Understatement of the century. Rock and roll was about youth culture, self-expression, and like jazz before it, it shook up the social norms.
A real cultural phenomenon. Then we hit the 1960s, the counterculture movement, and with it,
psychedelic rock, man.
Totally. So much was happening then.
The 60s were all about questioning everything. Authority, boundaries, war, social injustice. It was a time of real upheaval.
And the music, it was a reflection of that, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The music became a voice for this generation that was yearning for peace, demanding change.
Yeah. Bands like the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, they weren't just making music, they were making statements.
Right, and they were pushing the boundaries of sound, too.
Think about the Beatles, incorporating those Eastern instruments, experimenting in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
The music, it was like nothing anyone had ever heard before.
They weren't afraid to break the mold, experiment, and it was this drive to explore, to create something totally new that fueled so much musical innovation in the 60s.
Love it. Okay, disco balls and platform shoes. The 1970s, gotta admit, I've got a soft spot for disco. That beat just gets you moving.
Can't help but move to that. And disco, it was more than just fun music. It was about freedom, liberation, especially for marginalized communities.
To the place where you could be yourself, let loose on the dance floor.
Absolutely.
But disco was also shaped by technology.
Oh, yeah. Big time. This was the era of synthesizers, drum machines. Artists could create these new electronic sounds, and that paved the way for so many genres we hear today.
Like EDM. electronic dance music, a direct descendant of those disco experiments.
Exactly. And from there, man, the music scene just explodes. The 80s brought us hip-hop, heavy metal, alternative rock.
Talk about diversity.
It's like the musical landscape became this giant, vibrant mosaic, and each genre spoke to a different subculture. It was a reflection of how society was changing, becoming more fragmented.
And that need for individual expression, well, music gave a voice to all of that.
Exactly. And then came the internet.
A whole new world. And the digital revolution, it, totally changed everything.
Totally. Think about it. The internet made it possible for anyone to create music, to share it with the world. It was this huge democratizing force.
And streaming services. I mean, suddenly we had access to millions of songs at our fingertips.
But it also made it tougher for artists to make money from their music.
It's amazing how technology can be both, this incredible force for good and also disrupt entire industries.
That's the paradox of progress, right?
It really is. So after this whirlwind tour through music history, what do you think the future holds? Where do we go from here?
Well, we've covered some major trends, but the beauty of music is in the details, The stories behind each song, the connection to the time and place they were created. What's next? It's anyone's guess. But the one thing I know for sure...
What's that?
We'll keep creating, connecting, expressing ourselves through music. And that's what will shape the sounds of tomorrow.
So true. So, listeners, what do you think? What's the next chapter going to sound like? What's going to be the next big musical revolution?